They called him a liar because of his skin, his silence, and his strength. Ms. Whitmore, a respected teacher at Hawthorne Prep, dismissed young Eli Turner with a smile that concealed quiet cruelty. She saw a black boy claiming his father worked at the Pentagon and decided it had to be fiction. The room laughed. Eli sat in that storm alone. But when they picked Eli Turner to doubt, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know his father, David Turner, was one of the nation's top security strategists, tasked with protecting the country from threats most people never hear about. What came next wasn't just justice, it was a reckoning. For a school, a teacher, and a system built on quiet assumptions. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Hawthorne Prep that morning. Marble floors gleamed underfoot, but behind the polished surface, the ground was shifting. And by the end of the day, truth would walk in wearing a badge, and everything would change. Eli Turner walked into Ms. Whitmore's classroom with the same careful steps he took every morning. Measured, quiet, almost invisible. He was one of only 3 black students at Hawthorne Prep, a polished, historic school nestled among marble fountains and bronze plaques that seemed to whisper, "You don't belong here." That day, Miss Whitmore had assigned a special project. "Tell us about your parents' jobs." The class buzzed with excitement. Madison talked about her dad, a venture capitalist. Julian bragged about his mom, a state senator. And then it was Eli's turn. "My father works at the Department of Defense," Eli said calmly. "He's in threat analysis at the Pentagon." The room went still, and then came the laughter. Quiet at first, then louder. "The Pentagon?" Madison scoffed. "Sure, and my dog works for NASA." Julian chimed in. "Yeah, right. Maybe he's just the night janitor. That's what my driver says about people like that." Mrs. Whitmore didn't stop them. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she smiled, tight, thin-lipped, and said, "Eli, imagination is a wonderful thing, but please try to keep your stories realistic." That stung deeper than any insult. Eli sat down, the heat rising in his face, his truth turned into a punchline. The teacher's voice faded into background noise as he stared at the floor. He didn't care about the project anymore. He just wanted to go home. But here's the thing. Eli wasn't lying. His father really did work at the Pentagon. Only nobody believed that a boy like him could carry a truth so large, so powerful. And as the class moved on without him, one question settled heavily in the room, unspoken, unanswered. Why is it so easy to believe a lie about a black boy and so hard to believe his truth? A slow, heavy silence wrapped itself around Eli, not just in that moment, but in the space between how the world saw him and who he really was. Have you ever been disbelieved, not because of what you said, but because of who you are? Stay with me, because Eli's silence won't last forever. Eli didn't say much when he got home. He just dropped his backpack by the door and went to wash up for dinner. His father, David Turner, was already at the table, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, reading briefing notes on a secured tablet he never let out of his sight. "You okay?" David asked without looking up. Eli nodded. "Fine." But he wasn't, and David knew it. His son was quiet, but David Turner had spent his life learning to hear the words no one said out loud. David had a presence about him, stoic, composed, the kind of man who didn't raise his voice to be heard. He didn't talk about his job much, only that he worked in threat intelligence. Eli had once asked him what that meant, and David just replied, "I stop bad things before they happen." After dinner, they sat outside on the back porch, the autumn wind brushing dry leaves across the wooden planks. Eli finally spoke. They laughed at me today, he said softly, said I made up what you do. David set his cup down slowly. The teacher too? Yeah. Silence. And then David did something Eli didn't expect. He took off his wristwatch, the one with the government seal on the back, and placed it in his son's hand. I don't wear this for show, David said. I wear it to remember why I do what I do. Eli ran his fingers over the worn engraving. Why didn't you ever come to career day? David looked up at the stars before answering. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing I can do is be seen. A pause as the weight of those words sank in. Do you believe me? Eli asked suddenly. Not about the job, but about them. The school, the looks, the laughter. David nodded. I've been where you are, son. And it doesn't get easier. But we don't break. We learn, and we watch. Then he added with quiet fire in his voice, they laughed, because they can't imagine someone like you holding the truth. What happens when the people we trust to guide our children are the ones who silence them instead? The porch light flickered. The night pressed in, and in that moment, Eli realized something. His father didn't need to raise his voice, because his strength was louder than any shout. Parent Showcase Day arrived at Hawthorne Prep with silver trays of catered food and the low hum of polite conversations. In every hallway, polished shoes clicked on marble floors. Most of the kids were buzzing, eager to show off their parents. But Eli sat in his seat, still and silent, staring down at his desk. He wasn't sure his father would come. David had promised, but promises in his line of work came with risks. For days, Eli had heard the whispers. He's not showing up. Probably doesn't even exist. Then the classroom door opened. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped in, flanked by a silent hush. He wasn't tall, but he stood like a soldier, calm, measured. Authority clung to him like shadow. David Turner. He walked straight to Ms. Whitmore and offered a firm handshake. Ma'am, he said simply, showing his Pentagon-issued ID badge. Her smile faltered. Mr. Turner, she managed, we weren't expecting. Eli asked me to come, he said, as though that was reason enough. Around the room, parents began to murmur. A few students sat up straighter. Madison's mouth actually dropped open. Julian stared like he'd just seen a ghost. Eli rose slowly from his seat. His hands were trembling, but his eyes were clear. This is my dad, he said to the class. He works in national security. David stepped forward. I can't talk about much, he began, but I can say this. Eli didn't lie. In fact, he showed more courage this week than most adults I know. There it was, truth spoken aloud, undeniable. And for the first time, nobody laughed. For a moment, the room felt like it had stopped breathing. Even Miss Whitmore couldn't meet Eli's eyes. How often do we wait until power walks in the room before we decide someone deserves respect? Eli sat back down. The same seat, same name, same boy. But everything had changed, not because the truth had changed, only because it had finally been seen. That same afternoon, long after the applause and polite nods of Parent Showcase Day had faded, David Turner stood outside Hawthorne Prep, checking his phone. He wasn't smiling. A silent alert had triggered just minutes ago. An encrypted breach attempt, targeting the school's internal network. The source wasn't a student prank. It bore the signature of something darker, professional, coordinated. David's face tightened. This wasn't about Eli's classmates anymore. He stepped away from the car, made one call, and spoke 6 words. Initiate protocol. Lock down all systems. Then he looked back at the school, his son still inside. Inside, Eli had no idea. He was basking in the rare glow of being seen. But Miss Whitmore, now unnerved, was glancing constantly at the hallway. Her voice cracked slightly as she tried to continue the event. Moments later, the school's fire alarm shrieked to life. piercing, sudden. Lights flickered, doors automatically sealed. Students screamed. "Stay calm," David ordered the nearest faculty member as he moved past her, flashing his badge. "You're about to find out what I really do." In the chaos, he found Eli in the science wing, being ushered toward the gym with the others. He didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arm around his son, scanning every shadow. From the corner of his eye, David spotted a man in a maintenance uniform walking away. Too fast, too calm. And in that split second, instinct took over. He handed Eli off to a security officer. "Go with him, now." "Dad, what's going on?" Eli asked, eyes wide. But David was already running toward the danger. How many times do fathers fight battles their children never see, just to keep them from ever knowing? Later, when the threat had been neutralized, a surveillance device planted near the school's server room. Eli sat beside his dad in the back of a government SUV. "No more lies, no more pretending." David finally said the words. Someone was watching. Not just the school. Us. Eli's breath caught in his throat. And suddenly, his world was no longer just classrooms and lunch tables. It was shadows and secrets. But his father was no longer just a myth. The day after the security breach, Hawthorne Prep was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. No laughter in the halls. No clatter of lockers. Just whispers, low, uncertain, and the sound of shoes hesitating outside classrooms. The truth had landed hard. The surveillance device had been found near the student database, another near the faculty lounge. But it wasn't just about technology. It was about vulnerability. The school's defenses weren't just physical. They were social, cultural, and David Turner knew it. He returned the next morning, not in a suit, but in uniform, flanked by federal agents who would brief the staff and assess the breach. Yet he had another mission, to speak to the principal and to Miss Whitmore. Principal Sloan was nervous, understandably. "Mr. Turner, we had no idea." David cut him off. "You had no idea who my son was. And worse, you didn't care to ask." He turned to Mrs. Whitmore, who stood with her hands clenched at her sides, her voice low. "I'm sorry," she said. "I misjudged him. I misjudged you." David held her gaze. "You misjudged the cost of your assumptions." Eli had to bleed truth before anyone saw him. Her lips parted to reply, but no words came. How many children go unheard simply because their truth doesn't fit someone else's story? Word spread fast. The school board ordered a full review. Inclusion policies were rewritten. Faculty were enrolled in training, not just for optics, but for real change. And when they asked for a student voice to help lead that work, one name came up again and again. Eli. At first, he didn't want it. But when his father asked him one evening, "What if your voice helps another kid avoid what you went through?" he said yes. He stood before his class weeks later and spoke of silence, of being doubted, and of the quiet pain of not being believed. This time, no one laughed. And for the first time, the room didn't just hear his voice. They listened. Spring arrived late in D.C., and with it came Hawthorne Prep's annual showcase night. A polished event of projects, recitals, and polite applause. But this year, one table stood apart. Eli Turner stood next to a trifold poster titled Truth, What We Carry and What Others Assume. Beside it, a timeline of his journey, the day he spoke up, the day he was laughed at, and the day his father walked in. Around him, classmates gathered, many of whom had once smirked when he spoke. Now they listened, not out of pity, but respect. His truth, once dismissed, had become a mirror the whole school had to look into. Mrs. Whitmore approached, hesitant. "Eli, your work is remarkable." He nodded politely. "I was wrong," she added, voice catching. "I can't undo that, but I'm learning." Eli didn't say much, But his silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. Across the gym, David stood beside Eli's mother, arms folded, watching his son speak with quiet grace. No security detail, no flashing badge, just a father, proud and still. After the crowd thinned, David walked over. "You sure you're only 13?" he teased gently. "Pretty sure," Eli grinned. They sat outside on the school steps, watching the moon rise over the stone courtyard. "You know," Eli said softly, "I used to wish you had a normal job, one that came to school plays and field days." David took a breath. "I used to wish I could explain everything, but I thought silence was protection." They sat there, the distance between them now bridged not by secrets, but by understanding. Then Eli asked the question his father hadn't expected. "Do you think I could do what you do someday?" David turned to him, not surprised, just proud. "What do you think?" he asked. "Have you ever realized that the legacy you're leaving isn't what you did, but how you stood when it mattered most?" That night, as they walked home beneath the soft glow of the street lamps, neither said much. But the truth? They didn't need to. Their bond had already spoken. Sometimes, the loudest injustice isn't a shouted insult. It's the quiet dismissal of someone's truth. Eli's story reminds us that dignity doesn't always come dressed in a uniform or with a title. Sometimes it comes in the form of a child who dares to speak up, and a father who stands quietly but firmly beside him. As we get older, many of us carry stories like Eli's, moments when we were overlooked, doubted, or underestimated, and yet we endured. Not by shouting back, but by standing tall, living true, and letting our actions speak louder than judgment. This story invites us to remember that truth is not always believed at first, but it does not lose its power. The world may not always see us clearly, but we can choose to see each other with patience, with compassion, and with the belief that every voice matters. So maybe the real strength lies not in proving ourselves, but in living in a way that cannot be ignored. And maybe the greatest change begins not with grand gestures, but with simply choosing to believe someone when the world won't. In the quiet of a spring morning, Eli sat beneath the oak tree in his school courtyard. No spotlight, no applause, just sunlight on his face and the calm knowledge that the truth had found its way through. That's the kind of strength the world often overlooks. It doesn't roar. It endures. What followed wasn't a parade or a headline. It was slower, deeper work. Teachers learning to listen better, policies rewritten, and a young boy growing into a young man who knew beyond doubt that his voice mattered. The damage couldn't be erased, but something better was being built in its place. Understanding, accountability, and the steady refusal to let history repeat itself quietly. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.